This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with classical violinist Nathan Cole, and he talks to me about creative leadership and what CEOs can learn from orchestral and classical musicians. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm excited to bring you our featured guest today. His name is Nathan Cole, and Nathan is a Kentucky-born and LA-based violinist and is the first associate concertmaster of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Nathan studied violin at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. He is currently on the faculty at the Colburn School for the Performing Arts and at the Azusa Pacific University, and also has an online violin school with ArtistWorks. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Well, actually right now I'm at Azusa Pacific about to teach my students there, violin performance majors here. And besides that, we're in the middle of a big Beethoven festival with the Los Angeles Philharmonic with Gustavo Dudamel conducting. And then every day I'm working with my students on my online school, ArtistWorks.
And so how much time would you say you're dividing between the performance side with the LA Phil, and how much time are you dedicating to the kind of teaching part of what you do?
Well, definitely most of what I do is performing now with the Philharmonic and occasionally outside the Philharmonic. That's really the full-time job, and so teaching is becoming more and more a part of my life. It's always been a small part, and now it gets bigger and bigger, but I'm mostly a performer.
And with the LA Phil, how much time do you tend to be on the road doing international touring or touring around the US? And how much are you basically where you're based in LA?
So in LA, we play 9 months of the year at Walt Disney Concert Hall downtown, and then for most of the rest of the 3 months, we play at the Hollywood Bowl. So we really have two great venues in LA, and therefore this orchestra tends to do a little less traveling than some other orchestras because we're able to bring people in LA. There are a lot of people here, obviously, and there's a real appetite for the music. I would say that each year it's about 3 weeks that we're on the road.
And obviously, Dudamel is known for about El Sistema and getting a lot of kind of younger players involved. So, with a lot of the work that you're doing with the orchestra, are you doing much kind of outreach work and working with bringing in the kind of next generation of players?
I would say that the organization as a whole does a lot of that, and I know, in fact, that they do a lot of that. But the LA Phil has decided to create basically a whole separate department for that. Not that we don't ever interact, because we do, but they really have people whose whole job it is to work with younger players, and especially those who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford instruments and lessons and things like that. So in LA, they have an El Sistema type program called Yola, Youth Orchestra Los Angeles, and so tens of thousands of kids are able to join with the Philharmonic that way.
And how did you get your start on the instrument? And at what point in that kind of progression did you kind of say to yourself, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be a professional violinist. Where did it make the change from just being something you were doing for fun to actually something, okay, this is really what I want to make my career from?
It's funny. I've been thinking about that a lot this week because I'm working on a piece now and I'm working on it for the first time since I was 15, and that's really kind of the piece and the summer that I decided this is what I'm going to do. So I've just been thinking about that time in my life. I started when I was 4. Both my parents were professional musicians. They were flutists, but you can't really start on the flute until at least 8 or 9 very successfully. And, I was showing some interest in wanting to play music. So violin is one of those instruments you can start early. And there happened to be a lot of great teachers for kids in the Lexington area and the central Kentucky area. So I started when I was 4, the Suzuki Method, and that's a method that emphasizes a lot of playing by ear and playing in groups, and kind of watching other kids the same age as you doing the same thing. So it was social, which I think was a great way to get playing. And then I guess just to fast forward to that summer that I was 15, that's kind of when I decided, my parents and other teachers and other people have been kind of pulling me along, and now's the age that if I'm going to get better than I am now, I have to really decide I want it for myself, and I have to do more work and just really think about how I'm actually sounding.
So I would imagine, like, kind of growing up in Kentucky, you tend to think of that more when I think about violin, I think about it from the bluegrass tradition more so than any other kind of tradition. So around you at the time when you were kind of growing up as a kid, were you hearing lots of other styles of music, or were you very much immersed in the kind of classical tradition?
I wish I had heard more of that back then. I would hear it for sure, but I would say that predominantly, what we had on in the house was, Itzhak Perlman and the great classical violinists, and, the lessons I was taking were more along that line. So probably I heard, the bluegrass I heard would have been on TV, just like anybody else would hear it. And I think now that's a style that has a lot more mainstream popularity. I think back then, you wouldn't play bluegrass in public probably unless you were at a bluegrass, a fiddle competition or something like that.
Yeah. And so I know a lot of our listeners, they're either professional players themselves or they aspire to having a career in music. So, and they're often very interested about the kind of daily kind of rituals and habits of successful musicians. So, I mean, what does the first hour of your day look like?
Well, I think the first hour is probably just trying to get a healthy start and just really get out of bed and get some good food in me. I drink coffee, so I have a big coffee. That's my only one of the day. And then on most days, my first task is really to get to work early, get warmed up, and get ready for the rehearsals there. I usually don't have the luxury of doing my own work first thing in the morning unless it's going to be 6 in the morning. And since we perform so often at night, usually that's not a great option for me. So I get to work. I do a pretty abbreviated warm-up there, just trying to kind of center my ear mostly and get the major muscles working, and then we launch into the day at the Philharmonic, and the challenge there is just so much new music all the time.
I mean, what the kind of days look like? I mean, what time do you tend to start with kind of rehearsing? What times do you tend to go through to, and how do you fit your own practicing in amongst all of that?
Yeah, that is a big challenge. Well, a typical weekly schedule, I mean, the daily schedules are different, but the week to week, it's generally about the same. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, those are generally the rehearsal days. And so typically we'd start at 10, and if there's only one rehearsal in the day, it might be from 10 to 1. If there are 2 rehearsals, it'll go from 10 to 4 with a lunch break in the middle. And so we'll typically do 4 rehearsals each week and then start performing Thursday. So we'll perform Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And all of that would be one program, which at the symphony tends to be about 2 hours, somewhere between 2 and 2.5 hours. And so you get 4 chances to perform it, and then the next week you completely change the program.
It's a bit like actors that are in repertory companies. They every week as a new play, they have to completely change, and they're a new character.
Yeah, I mean, that was the single biggest challenge for me, going from being a student to a professional, was just the speed. I mean, you often hear about that in sports, like, the college game, whatever sport it is, the college game looks so much like the professional game, but again and again, you'll hear people say, oh, when I became a pro, everything was just so much faster. And I would say that was true for this too. I was used to having a month to prepare a program and really get used to it. And then all of a sudden, it's like, start rehearsing on Tuesday and you're performing on Thursday. It just didn't seem real.
Yeah.
Like, how can you do this?
And with the string players in LA, do they kind of go between working with the big orchestras, they like the LA Phil, and doing the more kind of film type work as well, or do those players tend to be very different types of players?
I wouldn't say that the players are necessarily different types of players, but the life is different enough that many people do cross over. Most of the full-time members of the Philharmonic are not able to do a whole lot of film work and studio work simply because there just isn't time, and you're not able to commit. A lot of those calls for the studio and film work, they'll come in a day before or 3 days before, and the few times that I've gotten calls, we tend to be playing at the Philharmonic, and so I have to say no. And after I say no a couple times, they get a little tired of calling and hearing a no. They want to call someone to say yes.
And how does that compare with, let's say, your peer group that are working in orchestras back east, or in London, or in Berlin? Is it because everyone keeps telling me that the Berlin players, they have the best life. They've got, they have like great conditions, and they have all this the London players basically have to work all the time. They're working, they're very intensely. But what's your take when you're speaking to these different players that are working with these different orchestras? How does it vary?
Well, I think your assessment is right on, and that's mostly because of pay and conditions, and that's why you go to a place like Berlin, or I would say LA. I mean, they definitely we're taken care of here so that we can focus on what we do, which is putting on these concerts week to week of great music. And I know that I can't speak for all of the orchestras in London, but the general reputation is that they simply don't pay as well. And as you know, cost of living there is sky high. So, to make it work, you've got to play in more than one group, and you have to do the extra work. Whereas here and in Berlin, that would be something you could choose to do.
Yeah, I think I remember reading a while ago. I was at an event last year or the year before the Royal Albert Hall, and I was with one artist, and then the act I suppose before us was actually Sir Simon Rattle with the Berlin Phil, and watching someone watching from the back shop, seeing how that organization operates and how it works and how efficient it seems to be in terms of like just everything's they're just incredibly on it, and they look like from looking at it from the outside that those players are treated pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that comes, it's unfortunate that in many orchestras there's an adversarial relationship between management and musicians, because it really, you see an organization like that, and I would say as well here in LA. And you wonder why there has to be so much fighting so much of the time. And I understand that. I've been part of some groups where there is more tension in that regard. But when a management or an administration can set a consistent and clear mission or agenda that really puts the music front and center, then everybody feels confident and they're able to make that their work.
And how much influence does the conductor have? So let's say you've got Sir Simon Rattle in Berlin. He's obviously moving to London, so he's going to coming into a new orchestra. Is someone like him is really able to change the conditions of that the musicians are working under, or is it really like the management is a completely separate thing in itself?
When it's all working together, I would say that if you were to pick two figures, let's say the president / CEO of an orchestra and the music director, when it's all working right, I think those two figures have about equal pull or equal chance to make changes for the better. When it's out of balance and a CEO has too much power, then bad things can happen. Or when a CEO is weak and a music director is strong, bad things can happen too, because you may be doing good work in rehearsals and performances, but meanwhile everything's crumbling around you, and you can't hire the new flute player that you need because they can't get an audition organized, and you're not reaching out to new audiences because the conductor is great with Beethoven but doesn't care about anything else. And so But I don't know if your question also meant musically, how much effect does the conductor really have? Was that part of it?
Yeah, I suppose probably more about just the actual working conditions for the musicians, though. Keeping a kind of happy ship and things, and because as I don't come from that world, not knowing the kind of power that the management or the administrative layer has with an orchestra, because you tend, as someone that just enjoys going to say concerts and go see the San Francisco Symphony and so you're obviously just seeing the front shop really most of the time,
right?
And it looks that for you that is the organization. You don't see all the other stuff that's kind of going on in the background. So I think I was just interested to know about how that dynamic works between management and the actual the talent, I suppose you would call them.
Well, if I might say one more thing about that, it reminds me a little bit of a household with two parents and the classic situation where a kid sort of tries to play one parent off the other one.
Okay.
If the two parents don't have the same message, then it's chaos in the house. And I think that's between a music director and a CEO, let's say, representing all of the management. When those two have the same voice, then great things happen. But it has to be consistent, because there are a couple scenarios that come to mind where a conductor will say, well, our work is the most important, and we're doing these great things on stage, and we don't want to let management get in our way doing that. That automatically sets up an adversarial relationship, or where management says, it's your guys' job to put on the concerts, but we're not able to sell tickets, and so it's a real problem, and we're not going to pay you as much. Whereas if both sides back each other up, where management says, we believe in what you guys are doing, the performances you're putting on are so important that we're dedicated to bringing people in, and the music director says, we've got to be disciplined, what they're doing to put on these concerts is so important that we have to raise our level to make it worth it for everyone.
Yeah. And then talk to me, what would you say is your biggest weakness as a music artist, as a creative person?
I think for myself, it's being a little bit slow to see new possibilities. I get very into refining what I do, and trying to make my main thing, which is playing the violin, to make that better. Day by day, I love being in the practice room and refining that. And so I think sometimes it's easy to miss the whole wide world out there. And, when I discovered how easy and how rewarding it was to connect with students online, I was like, well, what have I been doing all these years? So I that's something I'm trying to work on, staying in the technology news and, reaching out to other people who are doing what I'm doing and, kind of ahead of me in the curve.
And then what about on the flip side? What would you say are your biggest strengths?
Well, what I mentioned, the willingness to keep just opening myself up and saying, this is not good enough. This is not where I want to be. And, to keep myself in shape and to be the best performer I can. I wouldn't say that I always had that as a kid. I've kind of come to that later in life, and now it's something that I'm very proud of. And after that, just an honesty, a willingness to be myself on stage and in the way that I deal with colleagues, because those relationships are so important.
And how much is that, wanting to push yourself to kind of be the best at what you're doing? How much of it is it reflects back on, or is reflected because of where you are in the world? You're in a notoriously competitive industry, in a notoriously competitive part of the industry, i.e. within classical music, within these great orchestras, and you're in an incredibly competitive city within that as well, where you could say the same for New York, I suppose, as well. But how much does that drive you forward, and how much of it is more intrinsic to you, just saying, okay, I need to kind of take my game up a level here?
I think most of it comes from within. I think it has to. But being where I am, just as you say, I mean, that's what provides the spark or the push, let's say, on a day when I just don't feel it. It's like, well, why do I need to work today or this week or this month? I'm doing pretty well, but there's that constant pressure. Here we are in LA, and the cameras are on us, and the hall is full, and most people want to come and hear a good concert, but there are always people that want to say, hey, these guys think they're great, but I can see their concerts and I can hear their concerts, and I'm going to wait for them to slip up. There are always those folks,
Yeah.
and so you don't want to give them the opening.
And how much, in an orchestra set, I was talking the other day with someone we both know, Jason Vio, the great Grammy Award-winning classical guitarist, and he was talking about that pressure, the competitive nature, which does seem to be something quite. You hear it a lot more, I would say, in classical music. When I speak to classical musicians, I talk to probably other styles of music. This competitive nature in actually the craft of what you're doing. And he said, unless he performs well, he's got like 15 other guys waiting right behind him, ready to take his job. So it's quite a singular individual. There's a drive there from that point. But you're working in a core of other musicians as part of an orchestra. So how does things like competition relate to something like that, where it's not necessarily the individual, it's more you're more part of a group of people who are trying to do something? And where does are you conscious of, if I don't do this well, then there's a bunch of other young kind of players that want to take this job?
Right, that's a great question, and it's funny. I finally got to play with Jason for the first time this summer at my chamber music festival, and what a great player and artist and guy too. But yeah, as a solo artist, I mean, that it's so acute, that feeling of every note I play, people are listening, and just as you say, in the orchestra, I've got always 15 other first violinists playing the exact same thing that I am. But I have the occasional solo, but yeah, generally it's there's not nobody's going to come and take my spot tomorrow. That's just not the way this business works. But for us, then it's more holding that respect together. I mean, a great group, a great orchestra can only function on a high level when there's mutual respect. And if I have a position of leadership, I'm second chair basically. So I sit next to the concertmaster, or if he's not there, then I'm first chair. And so people can see me, and the conductor can see me. And if I slack off, and it's very obvious from one violinist to another, you can see immediately if someone's not really going with their full commitment. If I do that, other people say to themselves, well, if he's not doing what he needs, if he's not bothering to put in the effort, then why should I? And they don't go down to 50%, but they go down to 80% because it's more comfortable. And soon you get everybody doing that, and then it's no longer the group that it was. So it's not the immediate competitive pressure, but it's the long term and the overall health of the group.
I suppose I know it's become quite fashionable. At one point, it was quite fashionable for a lot of large organizations of CEOs to bring in orchestras into their annual board events, meetings, and things to show how a large organization, how a team can work together, albeit doing very different tasks as well. So are there things that you've, actually just out of interest, does the orchestra do much of that stuff where it kind of works with kind of corporations and to show those kind of things about leadership and about how a team works together, and about how something like how creativity can come from working in that way?
We do, actually. I can think of a couple recent examples. And I've been part of the kinds of things that you're talking about where you actually have the CEOs come on stage and sit with us. That was not with the LA Phil, but recently the LA Phil, we've invited like an entire leadership structure from a major bank, for example. They'll come in and observe one of our rehearsals with Dudamel, and then they'll have a Q&A with Dudamel afterward. And then they can see in action exactly how it works with the orchestra. But another thing I was a little bit more personally involved with, we have a very large and strong board here for the Philharmonic, and many leaders of industry and finance and all that, and out here, of course, entertainment. And so at a board retreat, three of us got to conduct an open rehearsal of chamber music. So we just played a Mozart string trio, and for about an hour, we sat and rehearsed it, and there were about 50, CEO types sitting so close to us. I mean, just 2-3 feet away, surrounding the group. And they had a chance to interrupt at any time and ask us questions. And I found that fascinating. I know they got a lot out of it, and the kinds of questions, sometimes they might make us laugh as musicians, but, it really showed how engaged they were. For example, shortly after we started, we were talking about starting together and what character we wanted to start with, and one of the board members there asked a question. I believe he was with a bank, and his question was just, well, who's in charge here? Who's running this rehearsal? And it was because in his world, he's always got to be in charge. If he's in a room, everybody's paying attention to him, and that works for what he does. But it took him a little time to get used to the fact that three of us could work exactly as equals. And there was a little bit of tension in the room. For us, we're used to that tension. Just going through a rehearsal, one time you're leading, one time you're following, but that made some in that room a little uncomfortable, I think.
And what were some of the key takeaways that you think those executives took from that experience of seeing up close how musicians in that way work together?
I believe that the main things they took away were, yes, the one that every member of the group was equally important, and by extension that every voice musically was equally important. I think they could see those two things going together, because that's just hard to see when you're listening to a symphony orchestra. There's so many moving parts, and it's really exciting in the music. There are a million different sounds being made, and on one program there may be music of 4 different styles. So it was great, I think, for them for one whole hour just to hear one piece by Mozart, and to hear really the inner workings of that, how Mozart created the piece and how we had to wrestle with that. I think they were a little surprised that we didn't come in already knowing exactly how the group wanted to play it. I think they were surprised to see us and hear us actually working that out in front of them.
That's very interesting. And talk to us about a time in your life. I mean, you've had this journey in music, but talk to us about a time when you worked on a project or something you're trying to do, and you gave it your all, but for whatever reason it didn't work out the way that you wanted to. And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Well, I would say the clearest examples of that come to my mind are just big auditions that I've taken and haven't won. And the thing about auditions is that you really don't get much feedback, if any. And there is no second place, and there aren't any endorsements, and so when you don't win, it's tempting to just literally feel like you lost, or to think of yourself as a loser, and it almost feels as though the whole thing didn't happen. And I've had that experience so many times. And you pour 3 or 4 months of concentrated work into something, hours and hours a day, and then you show up, big day, tons of pressure. Maybe you feel you did well, maybe you don't, but in the end you don't come away with the prize or the job, and then that's it. It's radio silence, and you really don't know what other people thought of your playing. And that's it would almost be better if you heard 5 people say, well, I really didn't like that.
Yeah.
And here's why. But instead you've got nothing, and you just wonder, well, what did I get out of all that work? And so to answer that question, I've come to realize a few things. I mean, one, great work is never wasted, because when you do that consistently enough, you put yourself in the position to take advantage of other opportunities that come along. Because for every audition that you know about 3 months in advance, and you put in all this work, some other opportunity is going to come up 3 days in advance. And if you're the person that's in shape and ready to take it, then then those months of work were actually for that, perhaps not the other audition.
But how can you actually improve then if you don't know what you've done that didn't meet the grade? How does it work?
That's tough. That's part of the reason I like to work with folks online who are preparing auditions, because I can be, for some people, I'm their only voice that's telling them, okay, here's what you need to work on, and for other people, I'm just one voice out of many to provide my perspective. But yeah, if you don't have any feedback from those who are making the decision, and you usually won't have much feedback from them, then you've got to get it from somewhere else. You've got to keep playing for teachers or mentors or colleagues who can at least show you different directions. And you may not get that clear answer, like, this is what I have to do. It's not like the shot put where,
yeah,
hey, to win this, I've got to throw it further.
And how many of these rehearsals do the people that are actually playing at them, do they actually record so they can look back and see their performance?
You're never allowed to record auditions. And,
really?
Yeah, and it's I know why that is. I get it. It would be a great tool for people, but for that reason, that's why I really encourage people taking auditions. Do at least a couple mock auditions beforehand. Run the stuff through for an audience and record that. See what you do under pressure and see what happens, and then from that you can tell, am I getting tight? Do I rush? Do I grip the instrument more tightly? Do I start sweating? I mean, you've got to know these things about yourself so that you can be prepared for them. And then, then the day of isn't as much of a surprise, and you're not going to have a record of that exact day, but at least your ears may be a little bit more relaxed so that you can actually pay attention to what's happening on that day.
Something I was kind of surprised at, speaking to a professor at one of the music schools a little while ago, was he was talking to me about the actual increase in drug use amongst students, taking, and I can't remember what the drugs were, certain drugs to basically lower their heart rate, and so they didn't completely freak out at some audition as well. And so is this obviously an open secret within the classical world that this stuff kind of goes on?
Oh yeah, the drugs I assume you're talking about are beta blockers, because that's what most people take, and most people, if they're going to use medication for that, I would say at this point it's probably it's not something that people shout from the rooftops, but it's talked about a lot more than it was, and if it's under the care of a doctor, if you're taking the appropriate dose, then everybody I've known who uses them, they don't report any side effects, except for while their heart rate is being lowered, some of them feel like there's not as much excitement overall. And if you're the kind to get overexcited in performance to the point where it hampers your message, then this can be a corrective. If you're just looking for a way to play better in auditions, that's probably not going to be it, because it deals with one facet of performing that may not be the issue for you.
And talk to us about this journey that you've gone through. Talk to us about any kind of aha idea or light bulb moment in this journey to making it music.
Well, I remember years back, and I believe this was in preparation for one of my many auditions, playing for a mentor, somebody who hadn't directly taught me a lot of lessons, but someone that I played for, once or twice a year, someone whose playing I really respected. And I was just really frustrated with not being able to play in tune. And on the violin, that's kind of a big problem.
Yes.
Obviously I had, my standard was high enough. I'd had some success, but I knew that to get to that next level, I was going to have to bring this more under control. And I was thinking of it as a control issue, and I'm going to have to focus in more closely. I think I used the phrase, I've got to aim for a smaller target. I was really thinking of darts or archery or something like that, and he said, maybe your target's too small already. And I thought that was kind of strange. That seemed like the opposite of what I needed to hear.
So he was telling you to like just take a different perspective on what you were trying to do.
Definitely. But it took me, I'd say, a full year to come around to that, and to realize that when you focus too closely on one aspect, not only can other aspects suffer, but that very aspect that you're trying to focus on can elude you, and it can actually get worse. So everything's got to be part of the whole, and it's a healthier way to live. It's a healthier way to think. I mean, we all know that, but it can be tough to remember that when you're in the daily grind of practicing. Something's not going well, you want it to go better, and sometimes you've got to let go a little bit to make that happen.
So what other great piece of advice have you received over the years, either in terms of the kind of the craft of what you do as a musician, or the just actually how you make a living, and in terms of what you're doing as well?
Well, one thing we haven't directly talked about yet are relationships, and that's something that I had been told since I was a teenager, and I've never been the kind of person to just be a jerk and burn bridges, but at the same time I was clueless about just how important those interpersonal skills are in our business, because it is a business, even though we like to think it's all about how we practice and how we perform, but it's a business, and not only will you go further in the business when you have more, but more importantly, deeper relationships with people, but it's just more fun, and you get different kinds of opportunities. And I've regretted some opportunities I've missed out on because I didn't stay in touch, or I thought to myself, well, what this person is doing is so different from what I'm doing. It's not. I'm not going to make it a priority to learn about what they're up to because it's too different. And I've come to realize, maybe it's not that different, or maybe even if it is, there's a lot that I could have learned from them. And I've taken steps to get back in touch with some of those people that I wish I'd stayed in touch with all along.
So just kind of staying connected, being kind of quite open, and just kind of really trying to build those relationships over a long period of time.
Exactly, and to do it because you want to, because that's who you are. And I look back on a lot of performances that I gave, or let's say fun weeks that I had performing with a group of people, and I really genuinely had an awesome time, and it was great, and they knew I had a great time during that week, let's say, but I didn't follow up and let them know just how great a time I had, or let them know, hey, it was really great to play with you, or to the presenter maybe, thanks for inviting me, this is a great series you have. And I could have said those things because I really believed them, but I didn't take the time to do it. And when the time comes for them to invite a performer again, maybe it's someone else, and it could have been me, and I would have enjoyed it. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you've got to do, but it's got to come from a real place.
Yeah, I mean, that's such great advice as well. I hear it. I was speaking to someone who does this very well recently, and he always has little postcards next to his desk. And he actually hand writes a thank you or something, and because we're so used to email now and phone and WhatsApp and everything else, he said that act of actually someone gets something through the mail it's actually a little bit strange now, but he said it has a certain type of impact. He feels good about it, and then obviously he hopes that the other person feels good about it as well.
Oh yeah, James Galway is another person, the famous flutist.
Yeah.
Who, my father, as a flutist, ran into him a couple times over the years, and I was stunned. One time when I used to play in the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, James Galway came to conduct, and when I let him know who my father was, he immediately remembered having met him before and where, and then the next day he showed up just almost exactly like you said. He showed up with a postcard that he'd already written to my dad, and he said, you just address it and put the stamp on it and put it in the mail.
Oh, lovely.
And my dad got the postcard, and he couldn't believe it. He's like, did you tell Sir James? But I said, no, he just remembered.
That's great. I mean, people remember that for such a long time. There's these little things. We get so focused on either the technique of the playing or the kind of hustle of of doing the business side of things that we forget those human points sometimes. So that's great advice. So is there any kind of online resources or apps that you love that you would recommend our listeners check out?
Well, we haven't talked much about ArtistWorks yet, but and of course I'm a part of that.
Yeah.
So that's just briefly. I mean, what a great place where players of basically almost any instrument in a variety of styles can come and work one-on-one with teachers. And so that's something I'm proud to have been a part of for the last several years. I want to mention one blog that I love for what I do, and I think his writing applies to just about anyone. The Bulletproof Musician.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this writer actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Noah Kagayama. He's a violinist. We ended up meeting when we were 16. We were both in the finals of a national competition. That was a competition where I had a huge memory slip. Actually, it was a big life lesson there. But he was also in those finals, and over the years, he decided to go away from performing and study more on the psychology. And so now he teaches at Juilliard. Basically, peak performance is kind of the phrase that's associated with him, how to do your best under pressure.
So if you could only recommend one record or book to our listeners, what would it be?
For me, it would be the Inner Game series of books. So maybe that's cheating, but for me it was the Inner Game of Golf, because I've always played golf, and that just completely changed my thinking and my practicing on the violin. And for those who've never read any of the Inner Game books, you're in for a treat. They apply to everything, and rather than being sort of new agey and weird and requiring you to sit around with incense and all that, the Inner Game is really just about being aware of what's happening around you and what's happening with your body when you're performing tasks like sports or music or whatever. And there is an Inner Game of Music book, but I think the golf one has always been more useful for me because it's not exactly about what I do for a living. Okay.
We'll definitely put those in the show notes. And what about a record? What record would you suggest our listeners check out?
Well, my favorite chamber music group, small ensemble, has always been the Guarneri String Quartet. And one of their records was actually put into the Voyager spacecraft back in the 70s, into outer space. So that's how much
it's up there somewhere.
Music at the time. So if whoever gets that spacecraft, the Guarneris will be one of the first things they hear, along with the opening to Also Sprach Zarathustra from 2001. Yeah. But no, really, one of their records of Beethoven string quartets is what I would recommend, just to kind of to hear what we were talking about, the four voices leading as equals and working together to really make a bold musical statement. And the music itself is just genius. So that's always close to my heart.
Great. So let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So all you have is your violin and the knowledge that you've acquired over your years of music. What would you do? How would you restart things?
Well, yeah, I think in this day and age, knowing what I know now, I think of myself as immediately able to help anybody play the violin better. So, I'd find a room with four walls, and I'd get myself a little video camera, and I'd be the guy who you could connect to and play the violin better. Whatever level you're starting at, I know where you are on the road, and I can help you take the next step. But I think that's how I would start out and see how it went from there.
Fantastic. And share the best ways that listeners can connect with you.
My website, natesviolin.com, Nates violin.com. And there, I have blog posts just about weekly, and I share my life as a performer and as a teacher, and again helping everyone play the violin better. And then my school at ArtistWorks, and that's the Nathan Cole School of Classical Violin there at ArtistWorks.
Great, and we'll put all those in the show notes as well. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking time out of rehearsals and doing all the stuff that you do to come on and talk to our listeners a little bit about what your life is like and how you built a fantastic career in music as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, James. Great to talk to you.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.